We saw it all play out on our city streets here. Hundreds of people making their voices heard against the immigration raids by the Trump administration and the president's mass deportation plan. Now, we saw it overnight, Metro Police declaring these protests unlawful. So we have a lot of questions for the ACLU of Nevada, the American Civil Liberties Union, and their executive director here in Nevada, Attar Hasibullah, kind enough to join us here on ARC Las Vegas to talk it all out, share his perspective on the overnight protests, what the organization's fighting for right now. Attar, thank you so much for being here. Really do appreciate it. You heard what Metro Police had to say. They put it out on social media. They made the announcement there live at the protest, right? They said it was unlawful. What did you see or hear that was unlawful?
Yeah, first, thanks for having us on. We deployed a group of observers last night, which we often will do for any protests that end up occurring to make sure that First Amendment rights are protected. Our observers report back to us so we can kind of centralize information. We generally heard that the protest was primarily peaceful. I think that was every report that was coming out. We did end up hearing ultimately that because of the crowd size, there were some folks that were shifting off the sidewalk onto the street to try to sort of move up or move back and forth. Dispersal order we saw and observed online first. The observers we had out, we know some folks heard an audible dispersal order, but we heard from other folks that they did not hear an audible dispersal order. The next thing that we were advised of generally was individuals who were there on site were being kettled. They were being pushed into specific directions, generally up against the wall. There was a heavy police presence there. And I know many of the folks were looking to disperse, but there was no clear path or instruction provided to many of those folks for how they would in fact disperse.
And Attar, I want to ask you about that if you don't mind, because you posted on social media overnight, if our control room can pull it up, that you were not involved in coordinating the protest, that it wasn't a coordinated effort. You're reviewing it now. You talked about kettling protesters, sort of, as you put it, and maybe I'm distilling it a little too much here, but hurting protesters and then hurting, H-E-R-D-I-N-G, and then firing pepper balls at people using tear gas, talking about this being a First Amendment rights violation and issue. So what's next for you? Do you take action on this? Do you file lawsuits? What's next for the ACLU of Nevada?
Well, look, first, we know other protests are coming. And so part of the reason why we made sure we shared that information was so folks can be aware that there are observers on the ground. Yesterday, when we shared that information, we made clear to share that, we're not the coordinators of the protest. I don't believe yesterday's was in fact coordinated like some of the ones are. I think this was a group of people that came together, and obviously based on the actions of the federal government and ICE, obviously that's expanding. From our organization's perspective, we're receiving complaints in real time of people, including people being injured last night from being struck by those pepper balls when they were looking to leave, people who were at a distance, and we're receiving reports this morning of individuals who are still detained from last night, even after they had cleared the vicinity and were approached by law enforcement at a distance, despite the fact that they were attempting to leave. So litigation is always an option for us, but I think the main thing we're looking at right now is to make sure that for these protests that are coming up this weekend, for instance, on Saturday, that there's not a repeat of what happens last night. Obviously, many of us were involved in the protests of summer of 2020, and we saw a lot of similarities last night to what happened then.
We were seeing some of the police in the footage that our cameras captured, zip tying people on the ground, detaining them at last night's protest. What do you say to those officers who are going to say that they were following the law, that they were doing what they were tasked with doing as far as crowd control measures? What do you say to Las Vegas Metro Police this morning?
Look, we want everybody to feel safe when they're protesting. Nobody's encouraging any level of non-safety during a protest, but they should be aware that if their dispersal orders are not being audibly received, that people can't hear them, they should hesitate before they attempt to use any level of force. And certainly yesterday, we didn't receive any reports of violent action before these pepper balls were deployed. So if that ends up being the case, it's incumbent on Metro to share what that ended up looking like. All we received the notice of was that there was non-lawful activity occurring in an unlawful assembly. That doesn't lead a lot for people to be aware of in terms of what may have been violated on the back end of it. If Metro is looking at any point to end a protest to make sure that they're providing pathways for people to leave, you can't push people against a wall and then lock them in effectively and then attempt to go after them with tear gas and rubber bullets. It's not acceptable. And if there's a different narrative there, I'm sure we'll be expecting to hear that from Metro probably today.
He's Attar Hasibullah, the ACLU of Nevada Executive Director. You can learn so much more about getting connected with them, aclunv.org. Attar, I got about 30 seconds, but before I let you to go, I know you want to make sure civil rights aren't being trampled on. What can people do who are out at these protests? Document everything, record everything. Just quickly, what do you suggest they do?
Yeah, everything, record everything you can. You have a right to record. Don't interfere with the rest. Follow lawful orders. Main thing, stay on the sidewalk if you're in Vegas. That's oftentimes the quote-unquote illegal activity if somebody stepped off the sidewalk onto the street. We'll also have volunteers out who are going to distribute some of this information on Saturday alongside a QR code where you'll be able to access more information about your rights as a protester.
Attar, thank you for being here. Appreciate you talking
Thanks
us
for
through
having
it.
me. Appreciate it.